one summer wrote a screenplay because she had done a live, I don't know how she did that, but she did a live theatrical performance on television. And I think it was called Because I Love Him. And it was, I mean, it was pure Joan Crawford. And I was so taken with it that I thought of a plot and wrote her a fan letter and said, I have this plot, and she wrote me back and she said, well, those things are all handled through my agent. You will have to contact him, and so on. At the time, she was in England making the film The Golden Girl, or the story of Esther Costello. And she won the British version of the Academy Award for her performance in that. And but she wrote me. Now at that time, I was off of school. I didn't have anything to do during the day, so I wrote a whole bunch of fan letters, which I had never done before. And so, you know, I had a certain expectation of what would happen when you wrote a fan letter. Well, I had, out of all the ones, I don't know how many I wrote, I guess about 10 or more. And out of those 10, 5 responded. They mostly responded with a little strip, very awkwardly cut out of a piece of paper, about how much it would cost me to become a member of that star's fan club, and what the dues were annually, and so on and so forth. So I got 3 of those. One from Dean Stockwell, one from Bing Crosby, and one from, I can't think of his name right now, but he was in the film Combat, the series on television. And the only 2 that answered me was the man who hosted that 1-hour live production of a story called Matinee Theater, which was every afternoon, Monday through Friday, and Joan Crawford. So you can believe I was dedicated to those 2 from then on, and a real fan letter was returned to me. And so I continued to see every film of hers that I could find playing at the theaters. And years later, I had a friend in Fort Worth who was tied up with one of the big fashion moguls of the day. And this fashion mogul was giving a party, and Joan was there. As lead up to this, you'll have to know what happened to him when he was a child. It was Halloween, and he went out trick-or-treating. He was just a skosh too old to really go out trick-or-treating, but he still loved it, and so he went out by himself. And so he rang the doorbell, and lo and behold, who should open the door but none other than Joan Crawford, having a momentary visit at a friend's house there in Fort Worth. And he said, "Trick or treat," and she looks around, she says, "Well, I'm not prepared for this, but why don't you come on in and let's go to the kitchen and see what I can warm up for you." And she was a Texas girl, remember, from San Antonio, and warmth was probably quite appropriate. So they went in, and he said, David, he says, I have no idea where it came from. But she sat me down in the living room of that house and asked me what I wanted to be when I became mature and old enough, and what I thought of world affairs. And all of this rhetoric came pouring out of my body about what I thought of world affairs and everything else, and what ought to be done with them and everything else. And when the appropriate time comes, she ushered me out of the house, and I went home. And went home to Mother and Dad to say, guess who I met? Joan Crawford. And jumping up and down and everything else. And my mother suggested, well, if you were so impressed with that, the thing that you need to do is to get her a box of chocolates or something and take that over to her. So the next day he went to the pharmacy and got a box of chocolates and told the clerk, I'm buying this box of chocolates for Joan Crawford. And she was with the attitude, sure, kid, that'll be $3.95. And so he bought the chocolates and he went over to her house, and Joan wasn't there. She had flown on to other places. Well, back at the fashion mogul's house at the party, several years later, well, many years later, he was then in his late 20s, and he said, Miss Crawford, oh, Joan, please. Joan, I'm somebody I'm sure you don't remember, but once at Halloween time you were at a house in Fort Worth, and you were the little boy that gave me the box of chocolates. Well, once I was telling this story and I welled up in tears, because that was the Joan Crawford that I knew. The one who was loyal to her fans and who would remember somebody insignificant like this friend, or at least insignificant then. I'm not sure how insignificant now. But that she, Miss High and Mighty, would think of us underlings in such a way as to think of them as her friend. Let's stop.